England. Once dominated by Roman conquerors, this tiny island nation rose to become one of the largest and most powerful empires in history. Its reach stretched around the globe, spanning every continent.
It was unimaginably large.
Technology, innovation, ambition, these were the tools that built this massive empire and produced the formidable British Navy, a powerhouse that dominated the world's oceans.
The Royal Navy is like the Microsoft of the global system in the 18th and 19th century. They are everywhere.
The British Empire constructed massive symbols of dominance that still invoke awe today. But the foundations of that empire were built on ego, bloodshed, and a relentless drive for conquest. (410 AD), the most powerful empire the world had ever known is under attack. At the far edges of the British Isles, the once mighty Roman legions march toward the coast in full retreat. They leave in their wake a military and political void. For the first time in more than 400 years, the vulnerable island nation of Britain must fend for itself. It was the end of one empire and the beginning of another.
The sun never sets on the British Empire. I've heard those words all my life, ever since I was a kid, even though I've never lived in England, and that empire is long gone. Hello, I'm Peter Weller. At its height, the British Empire covered almost a quarter of the Earth's land mass, some 14 million square miles, and if you think about that, that's just staggering. But how did an island, if you will, in the middle of the North Atlantic come to be such a behemoth empire? Well, in the early 400s AD, when those Roman citizens were fleeing in the face of an onslaught of Vikings and Jutes and Angles and Saxons, some of those marauding and plundering people decided to stay. Maybe they liked the temperate climate. And after several centuries, they'd organized and developed themselves into somewhat of an Anglo or English identity. But with the death of the last true Saxon king, Edward the Confessor, the door was open for another people to step in, the Normans, who were essentially descendants of the Vikings living in northern France. And at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, the Normans did that very thing. They took England under the leadership of a man named William, who we call today William the Conqueror.
With a ravenous lust for power, William would stop at nothing to become King of England.
To conquer another country like England, you couldn't really be a sort of touchy-feely kind of person. You had to be a very strong leader, and that's what he was. He was a brutal man.
In 1066, William made his move. He put together an army of Normans and stormed the shores of England. For several bloody hours, his forces viciously clashed with King Harold's near the English coastal town of Hastings. By the end of the day, with one strike, William had conquered England. Now he would borrow a chapter from the Romans and launch a series of extraordinary building projects that would transform the English landscape.
He imposes himself on England, and he builds these castles around the country. Now, we look at castles, and we think, don't they look nice? A Norman castle is not nice. It was big, it towered over your town, and it was a reminder to say that you are under us now. And of course, the biggest one he builds is the Tower of London.
William wanted the Tower of London to be intimidating. He chose a location on the bank of the River Thames that had once been used by the Romans. The new tower would be built on those foundations, capitalizing on the Roman legacy of power and glory. The complex would include a defensive wall surrounding an imposing...
Of course, the people they use to build it are the locals who have to do it, so they use them effectively as slave labor.
Building onto the remains of the Roman walls, workers first constructed the barrier around the complex. On the north and west side, where there were no Roman remains, they dug ditches and erected large wooden stakes as a barricade. Then they turned to the massive tower itself. For 700 years, England had relied on simple timber construction. Now William and the Normans would bring back the grandeur of Roman engineering techniques. Like the Romans, William would build his tower with stone. He didn't trust the quality of the local material, so he imported cream-colored limestone from France. His engineers also incorporated Romanesque arches and vaults within the structure for support. Inside the tower's majestic cathedral, workers constructed a series of intersecting barrel vaults, called groin vaults. These allowed the support to rest on 4 piers, opening a soaring space for windows to lighten the imposing interior.
It was a great feat for that time because the English were used to building in wood, so I think it was rather miraculous for them to see this enormous structure go up. It was really impregnable. I mean, the walls were tremendously thick and there were just little slits to look out from.
The fearsome castle served as a royal residence, fort, stronghold, and prison. And intimidation was backed up by swift and severe reprisal against any who dared challenge the king.
You get armed men, and they go up, and they land on your doorstep. They will drive you out of your home. They will burn your home down. They will burn your crops, so you have got nothing to live on. And a lot of killing, of course.
As the tower neared completion in 1087, William died, ending 21 years of turbulent rule. His imposing fortress would be a reminder of his vision and tyranny for centuries to come. A series of Norman kings succeeded William and continued his work on the complex. But it would be more than 400 years later that the tower would enter its bloodiest phase. And the king who led it there was not Norman, but from the English family of Tudors. He would become one of the most brutal and gluttonous rulers in England's history. His name was Henry VIII. Henry's appetites were legendary. He hungered for food, for women, for power, and for a son who would one day inherit the crown.
The best way to fulfill your duty and your destiny as a king is to produce a safe line of male heirs. And if you look at the portraits of Tudor gentlemen, they're standing with their legs apart and their hands on their hips with these big codpieces. That is not by accident. That is saying, I am virile. Look at me, I can produce families. So a son is a sign of manhood.
When his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, failed to produce a son, Henry set his sights on one of her ladies-in-waiting, the alluring Anne Boleyn.
He falls absolutely hopelessly both in love and in lust with Anne Boleyn, because Anne is a very, very sexy lady, and she knows it. There's only one problem. How do you get rid of your wife? Apart from murdering her, of course. And the answer is, I've got to divorce her.
When the Pope refused to grant Henry a divorce, the king flew into a rage. If he couldn't control his country's religion, he would simply replace it. He boldly severed all ties with Rome and appointed himself head of the new Church of England. Henry now had absolute control over his country. He divorced Catherine and made Anne his queen. But when she also failed to produce a son, she suddenly found herself accused of adultery.
The case is made as damaging as it's possible to be, that she's not just having one affair, that she's having a string of affairs, that there are sort of orgies going on in the palace, and Henry is only too ready to believe a lot of this.